US volleyball coach mentioned John Kessel a few years ago, who referenced the Olympic logo, Citius, Altius, Fortius. The important bit with that, as those three words, is the last two letters, Citius, Altius, Fortius, us, us, us. And that it's never always about the one person. It's never always about me. It's about the us. And the meaning of those words in higher, faster, stronger, references to the process of the at the end, the ER, the last two letters again. And there's only one est, there's only one best, there's only one strongest, there's only one fastest. And that together, us, we're always working.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to Trauma, Training and Transformation podcast, where we explore psychology, performance and lived experience and how movement heals the mind. I'm Dr. James Alder. In high performance environments, there's often an assumption that people at the top have things figured out. But the reality is often very different. Today, we explore the myth of having it figured out. I'm joined today by Dr. Michael Francis-Pollin, who has worked across elite, professional and international environments and is widely recognised for his work on creativity in sport and coaching. Michael, welcome to the podcast today, and to the benefit of our listeners, please introduce yourself.
Thanks, James. So, we've sort of known each other for a number of years and sort of intermittently and also regularly sort of just meet up, and it's always good to chat. We have some sort of good, productive conversations, I think. Yeah, for me, as you mentioned there, I've sort of had the luck of being exposed to sort of many different environments, and from grassroots right through professional, elite development, international, as coaching, as an educator, developer, mentor and supporter to players and coaches. But it's never been for me to really sort of dwell on that or even name drop. And I think really as an introduction, I was challenged quite a while ago now by a colleague to, rather than introduce myself by what I do or what I've done, and this is the same within sports education context as it is going to a party, that rather than introduce myself by what I've done or what I do, introduce myself by the difference that I make to people and with people. And that's important for me. And the difference that I make is I help people through sharing and collaboration, grow and develop, become a better version of themselves. And also to know and understand themselves in the context of whatever that performance is, to understand their behaviors, their attitudes, their emotions, their strengths and their opportunities to grow further. But the important message really is that we do that together. It's not a singular output. It's about collaboration and sharing. And that's how I introduce myself, by the difference that I make to people and with people.
Your work across both elite, professional, international environments speaks for itself. But from the outside, there's often a perception that comes with a level of experience. But what is the reality behind that image?
The reality is that I think people perceive you to be the expert, the omnipotent, know-it-all expert. And I think it's that I'm always open to learning. I think that's my main motivation for driving forward, that I'm always myself, learning and developing myself as well, which is the reality. I think that being the expert and being the best is never fully attainable. I think the main enthusiasm and motivation is working with and for other people for that greater good. I always sort of reflect back to something that a US volleyball coach mentioned, John Kessel, a few years ago, who referenced the Olympic logo, Citius, Altius, Fortius. The important bit with that, as those three words, is the last two letters, Citius, Altius, Fortius, us, us, us. And that it's never always about the one person. It's never always about me. It's about the us. And the meaning of those words in higher, faster, stronger, references to the process of the at the end, the ER, the last two letters again. And there's only one est, there's only one best, there's only one strongest, there's only one fastest. And that together, us, we're always working to get. And I think that's the reality for me, is that we work together, and that's that thing, that we're always in that process.
Do you think that's transferable in all environments? Maybe look at grassroots to a community, high performance, and then the international stage. Do you see that striving for excellence in all of those environments?
I think it's applicable throughout, and I think through my work, study, and research, I haven't all the work that I've done has been applied and practiced through grassroots Saturday mornings down the park, to state of the arts AGPs within inflated domes. That's been as local as a walk down the road as to international. So I think it's definitely relevant throughout, because it's bigger than high-end elite development applied sports science. It's about social sciences, and even beyond your emotional IQs. It's your performance, whether it's playing, performance, whether it's coaching. All that is your behaviors, your attitudes, and your behaviors, and that's the same at any level that whether it's grassroots or elite or international.
If you look at coaching throughout, coaches' responsibilities to teach, to learn, and to grow the knowledge of the players. And you're widely recognised for your work on creativity. But what does that actually mean in the context of sport and coaching?
So yeah, creativity is one of those little magical words, and people's ears prick up, and they like to think that if you've got creativity, you're going to be successful. And, if you mention that there's a potential, an opportunity, or a manual or a method to actually coach creativity, you are a wizard. I think, and that's been my long-term focus and long time study. And it was ignited many years ago, and got interested in creativity and approached by people as I started to talk and broadcast and publish stuff around creativity. And I think, to try and paint a picture, the traditional definitions and perceptions of creativity are, when you see it on the TV or in a stadium, it's those flair moments where somebody does ultimately something amazing, something different, and something original. And I think people have tried to simulate and replicate that is it something that we coach and train people? Is it through rote and repetition? Do you build up such a bank of abilities and skills, or practiced abilities and skills, that you'll have a solution to every problem, a prescribed solution to any and every problem? And I think, and a lot of the research stuff, early research stuff as well, around that, trying to create something that's original, are very one-dimensional lab experiments that say, if you can, most of my work, just to provide a bit of context, is, been based around football and rugby, but not completely void of other sports, team sports, and individual pursuits as well. I think what to sift through the traditional perceptions and definitions of what creativity is, and people perceive it or need to see it exhibited or evidenced in the physical space, that ultimately what creativity is it's more situational cognition of what goes on within a player's brain space. And the way I frame it, without delivering 100,000 words for somebody to read, or a 20 episode 20 series podcast here, it's around players' perception, process, product, and decision making. Thus, in perception, there's an awareness and anticipation of what's going on around them. The process is the cognition that's applied to that situation. And then the product is ultimately their action, which might be adaptive and changed. It might not be a precise thing. And that within that, within that adaptation, there's that internal feedback loop which provides for the performance. If you sort of rain that down, what you decide to do, you've decided to do. So that's your feedback from the past. So feedback comes from the past. It's formed in the present, but it's the plan for your future. And you could take that as a bigger model, as a feedback and a reflective tool for yourself. But in every micro moment as well, that's happening as well. Performance is your ultimately. I think it's easy to see within the context of sport, within a physical activity, that you'll see a physical action that is produced through perception, the process, and people might see that as, you read and you scan within that. But to go back to the traditional perceptions and definitions, we might align that with the round ball, Lionel Messi, what he's done and what he can do. Within the oval ball, it might be the actions of Antoine Dupont. But then you've got all those times and all those moments where players make those perceptions, and the process and their product might be just to drop into space and not receive the ball. They won't have the camera focused on them. They won't become the commentator's narrative, but they've still been creative in the sense that they've had a perception, a process, and a product. And then within that, there's a feedback loop that they've also planned for that next moment through the internal perception and process and product of what they've done. I think, beyond that as well, that's what it looks like on the training pitch. That's what it looks like on the pitch. But people get even more excited when we talk about coaching creativity. How do you actually coach that creativity? And for me, really, it's within the context of sports coaching. It's that the fundamental difference is the difference between designing the learning, development, and performance, and designing for the learning, the development, and performance. And to abridge what I found through study and research was that it's more about the consideration, the accommodating, providing space for that creativity to happen. And to drop a note in there, really the biggest coaching behavior, if you can perceive it as a coaching behavior, which I had to define and redefine, is that space and silence was ultimately that the time and the space where more creativity, as I've just defined, occurred.
For that creativity to happen, are you relying on critical thinkers, high mental performers, or the coaches to provide pictures of exposure to players to learn and grow? You mentioned Messi and Dupont there as very high-level performers, or is it a combination of both? So what I'm asking you really is, how do you think creativity shows up in performance environments?
I think within planning for design and delivery, that you offer real life or real situation pictures. I think ultimately it's not about prescription to solution. It's about problem solving for decision making. And that's within the consideration and accommodation. That's the fundamental difference between the designing the learning, development, and performance in the sense of creativity, and the difference and compared to designing for learning, development, and performance within the creativity context. And my research has been stood with and observing and working, mentoring and supporting coaches in the local park and arena, as it is to, elite and international as well. I think ultimately it's about working, mentoring and supporting the coach so that they understand their coaching behaviors. They understand their attitudes, behaviors, and emotions as their coaching performance. And that doesn't necessarily mean need to align to that that control and that role objective pressure. I think within some of the work within, and it probably relates to like Cat One Premiership academies within football, where the role objective pressures, the imposition of developing themselves, even where there's no scope or resource or remit for them to do that, but they've still got to do it and produce the products as player capital that's sold on from there as well.
You quite rightly mentioned about seeing that creativity on the sports arena, be it on a Saturday afternoon at your local team, or with sport being so widely viewed on TV, you can see these high performance performers showing that level of creativity. However, if we step away from that elite environment into everyday life, are there similarities or parallels in this space?
Into normal day life, yes, definitely. And I think, people think, well, it's just a normal, boring life. But those models and the definitions of as I've tried to explain there are prevalent in our everyday life. In every moment of our everyday life, we have to perceive, process, and produce a decision or an action. And it's probably more difficult because within we have the context, the control context within sport, what our objectives are. Aligning it to what a game or practice should look like. We're going in a direction. We have direction. We have an objective. And we know what the opposition, the opposition and those pressures are. What the things that we can't control, and ultimately, the most difficult opponent within a game in a sports context often doesn't play for the other side, and it's dealing with yourself. But within everyday life, that biggest challenge is ourselves, and that we have to perceive, process, and produce in every moment of our lives. And I think that aligns to that myth about having it figured out, more strongly than anything. And I think when we're working with others with a control context with sport, it's always objective. There's always logic, and that aligns to how we work and we give advice with other people. That we can be objective, we can be logical, we help them file in our prefrontal cortex, and that's the only bit we're dealing with. And then, but within ourselves, and particularly around our own attitudes, behaviors, and emotions, which is our everyday, which is our life performance, that we try and we conduct ourselves in that same model, but in a completely chaotic, unpredictable context. That the decisions we make upon ourselves, as the advice we give upon ourselves, where I help and make difference to other people, I can't do it myself. And that's not just me, that is everyone. But when we try and deal with ourselves to make our decisions, or we give ourselves advice when we're not feeling that great, particularly, that we're dealing with the subjective, we're dealing with the emotional, we're dealing with a different part of our brain as well, the one that's about fear and flight and amygdala, our lizard brain, that just goes. And that's our everyday life.
So you look at the principles of creativity that you explore in your research and in your work. How does that reflect in your own life, and how you utilize the principles of creativity?
Yeah, I think that's all in that same sort of answer. I think the way I would align it with my life, if we call it my life in parentheses, there is like, I think we're always experiencing new experiences without the experience to inform those current and upcoming experiences. And I think I would align it to, when you're a child, when you're a young person and we're growing up and we think, oh, I just want to be grown up. I want to drive the car. I want to do this. I want to do that. I can do this. I can do that. Thinking that the grown up people have all got it all right. And it's when I get there, I'm going to be a grown up and I'm going to be an adult and I'm going to have it all right. But when you get there, you find out they didn't have a clue, did they? And they thought that they were doing the best by us. And I think, again, it parallels or doesn't parallel to, there's differences between when you're applying creativity and how that impacts upon your emotional state and your mental well-being or health. When it's contextual within sport, it's easier to see those pictures. When it's in real life, when it's your real day-to-day, when it feels more impactful, it makes a more profound difference, which is more difficult to deal with because it's not contextually bound. And I think, how do you deal with that? I mean, there's like it's every day every day is a school day, and I can only sort of reflect. I keep reminding myself, and I see it as I've written it before. You're always learning, and you have to take it as you're learning every day, which is how I deal with it. I've learned something today. Every day is a school day, unfortunately, because I'd like to think after many years of going pretty much all the way through the educational system to get letters after the name and before my name that, I've done with all that. Gosh, it's just not the case. And that was it, whatever year it was, 1563, when he was sort of 87 years old, and Michelangelo wrote Ancora Imparo. And that's, referenced by um, writers and researchers through times, but it means I'm still learning. Yeah, he wrote that when he was 87 years old and still learning. And yeah, we have to accept that we're all still learning. But I think it brings, and it's just not the everyday of, getting up, going to work, going to school, getting the shopping on the way home, what you're going to cook, what you're going to eat, what you're going to watch on, telly. There's other things, there's bigger things in life, the emotional involvements and things happen in your life, things happen to you in your life, and it can feel like trauma on the macro, meso, and micro scales. Sometimes it feels like a trauma that relatively contextually might not seem much at the time, and you might move past that. Other times it seems like the whole world's against you and you are a failure, and that, you've got it so wrong. And is it real, or is it just but I think, in that sense, we go through that every day. I go through it every day. Yeah.
I totally agree. And I'm sure people listening to this podcast will resonate with that message. And we look at creativity and mental health. Is there really a relationship between the two? And do you personally see a correlation or a convergence between these two?
Definitely, yeah. I think we look at, I think creativity is one of those magical words, but it's also a bit of a false friend as well, because as I align it to that, the definition and understanding as I relate it to life today, as I do within the, contextual understanding for sports and coaching and player learning development performance and coaching performance, that our functions are primevally and primarily about how we see and understand and perceive the world, and how we process those perceptions of the world, and what we do or don't do, or what we say or we don't say in relation to those perceptions and processes that we have to apply. And, creativity is both a magical thing that, a Shangri-La that people chase within their life.
Hi, everyone. If this episode is resonating with you, do me a big favor. Like, share, and subscribe to the podcast, and share it with anyone who you feel may benefit by listening to it. Michael, being an expert in this field, does that bring its own challenges or even struggles really in your own life, particularly when the perception of being an expert can be so heavy?
Yeah, I think people think you've got all the answers, and it's like I say, that is the difference. That is the thing that, how I do introduce myself and how I would define myself as making a difference with people. People think you've got all the answers, but I think, and I think there is a postmodern thinker, Jean-Francois Lyotard, said about the difference between an expert and a philosopher, whereas an expert knows what he knows and what he doesn't know, and a philosopher does not. The meaning intended that, you know what you know as a philosopher, but you've got to be open to what will be as well. Emergent data within the research context as the unpredictable, chaotic, prescribed happenings and solutions within not normal life. And I think with that expert or a high level of understanding type of person, and as I spoke about how you speak to others to make a difference to others, and how you ultimately might try and speak to yourself to try and console sometimes, as opposed and also to try and improve one. And there is that fundamental difference between the objective and the logical and the loading of the prefrontal cortex, because that it's easier giving other people advice and helping other people, opposed to the subjective emotional attack on your lizard brain, when all you can do is find discomfort really in trying to sort yourself out. I didn't happen upon it till recently, but it's actually got a name, the Solomon paradox. So it's related to King Solomon, who was very apt and able at giving advice to other people within his community, and helping anyone and every to help them improve and make sure that they had no hardship. Yet he couldn't apply it to himself, which was thus and ultimately the downfall of his king. And I think that led me to believe or or think about how can you do this? There's a difference between dealing with the third person and the first person. The third person being everyone else, and the first person being yourself. And people say, give yourself a good talking to, or man up, or whatever. It is in that give yourself a good talking to, and it sort of happened, and I've tried this to varying degrees of success. But if you record yourself as though you're talking to somebody else with the message that you want to deliver to yourself, and then you play it back, it does sound like you're giving yourself a good talking to, but in the third person. So it will be something to report back to, maybe in a later date, in a further podcast, but something I'm playing around with at the moment, because, and as we've stood at the side of a rugby pitch and chatted about life and things as well, I, as anyone, are not immune to not just those everyday things, but the more stressful, impactful, emotional things in life, which as we've discussed and labeled is traumatic, whether it's in the present or in the post. And it is trauma, and it is difficult to deal with when it's yourself. There is a bit of value in giving yourself that talking to, in method that I've just shared and is still trialing. But and it's the same thing, and it relates back to the perceptions and the processing and the producing of an action, whether it's to say or don't say, or to do or to not do. And I think one thing that I found through, and it's can be a reoccurring thing, it's finding out and identifying and trying to deal with what is real in the real world, and what's not so real, and what I label as my enchanted world. Ultimately, I think it's about through and filtering out the things you can change and the things you can't change, but ultimately having that wisdom and understanding, or that bravery even to know the difference between the two.
You talked there about trauma and that hidden burden that coaches, influencers, trainers are placed upon, because they're seen as being the expert in their field, and they've got to provide all the answers really for the athletes. But that comes with a little of hidden burden, that trauma of never wanting to fail. And the way you talk then, it sounds like there's a degree of discomfort really with carrying that label. So if you just add a little bit really about what does discomfort really feel like, and how are you able to, as the expert, overcome that discomfort so then you can still move forward?
Yeah, I think within the sports context, you always have that with the context and the control and certainty that there is through the input and the output, that there's some objective certainty, and that you have control over that. And I think the difference between your personal life is that's not always as comfortable. And I think it's more precise within the professional context. There's a role objectiveness there. And I sort of align that to, even if you can change approach or methodology of a coach, that they'll always, after a certain amount of time or influence, and I think influence is sometimes a key word, you mentioned it there, referencing influencers, but resorting back to default, almost a process of resocialization where you find comfort in conformity within a sports context. And I think, yeah, it goes along with the line of we've always done it this way.
You must see some challenges on self-reflection and also that need to overcome that level of discomfort. And it could be through failure in a game or failure to recognize a picture that you're trying to influence the players to learn and be better at. How do you as a coach, or how do the players in that working environment overcome that discomfort and reflection so that they can overcome that next time?
I think it's just giving them, I think within the sports context like that, it's just creating a space where they feel safe and they can feel as comfortable in the uncomfortable. And I think all of that, and what I've just said previously as well, relates to life and how you try and deal with your own life as well. And I think it goes back to the difference that I make with people. It is a collaborative and shared thing. It's difficult to create a comfortable space just for yourself. And I think it's around, and I'd use the words around trauma as anxiety, and it's all linked to your nervous system. So if we go back to the comparison between dealing and helping other people in the third person and trying to sort yourself out in the first person, ultimately comes down to your nervous system. And not to want to delve too physiologically or scientifically into that rabbit hole. How do you regulate that? How do you self-regulate that? And I think as working with coaches ultimately is about helping them as helping yourself understand yourself. And there's no book about that, about yourself. There's no book about there's a trillion self-help books out there, but none of them are specifically about you. None of them are specifically about me. And if we can understand ourselves the best we can and give ourselves a bit of grace too, then we're, more than a long way towards dealing with that thing, dealing ultimately with whatever trauma.
So I'm glad you touched on that actually, Michael, because if you think about, we have these players who come to training, we have these athletes who turn up to put the shift in, but and sacrifice time. But we often forget that they have their own challenges away from the high performance environment. So we had to disagree really, but do you feel discomfort exists consistently in high performance environments just due to the complexities of athletes' lives?
I think, it's ultimately that expectancy of those that are working for and with you, expectancy of the stakeholders and or parents or whatever, but also ultimately expectancy of oneself without actually there being potentially a defined, precise, specific or precise prize. And I think, there's that imposition of those pressures, as in there's that imposition of decision making, whether it be in the context of sport and performance, or whether it's the imposition of decision making in our everyday lives. And it's an unknown quantity, and there's no exact rule book or policy that goes with it. So a lot about the stuff that I've done, and as people try and rein it in to understand it within a sports science context, it's bigger than a sports science context. It's bigger than just emotional intelligence. It's the social sciences combined, and it's such a variable, it's such an unknown quantity. But relating it back to where I define and try and get an understanding of creativity outside of the physical exhibition evidence of ability and skill. People talk a lot about, there's about mindset, mindfulness, and you could click on a link and go to a video around mindfulness, and what they try and do is not make your mind but empty it and get you to breathe in a certain way with precise time intervals between each breath. And then you'll listen to whale music or something, and picturing yourself within meadows. But I think, a concept I've come up with more recently, and I've sort of applied within my work around creativity, is mindfulness. So the subtle nuance and difference is, instead of it being full, it's fuel, as in petrol or diesel, whatever. But to try and conceptualize that in what's in everyone's minds, what are the things that are there, what are the things that can be improved and ultimately changed, and what are those variables. So to just give a bit of definition, description to that, talk about your drivers, what are your emotions, your enthusiasm, what's your understanding of respect, how do you give and receive respect, what are your assertive attributes, and how do you understand and how do you actually learn and develop yourself, what's your understanding of your intellect. And that's like, it doesn't put, talking about how many certificates you've got. It's your perception, your process and production of actions and decisions around your environment and your world, your values in life or within the context that you're learning and development ultimately performing. Your psyche, how do you use your mind? How can you use your mind? And I think, there's maybe some big words attached to that, but it's just to give people, whether you're a coach, whether you're a player, whether you're just here on this planet in this life, just to understand yourself in more simplistic terms, to give yourself, a measure of where you're at. And if you're in one of those categories, you're 5 out of 10 as you perceive yourself. It might not be about getting to 10. It might just be getting to 6. How do you get to 6? And there's opportunity in everyone, and they can self-manage that, and you can collaboratively manage that as well within the contextual expectations, whether it's for yourself or whether it's for a bigger picture.
I appreciate you sharing that, Michael. And as we come towards the end of our conversation, so you've covered a lot of topics over creativity and to finish off with mindfulness, which is key really in a lot of your practices that you do today. But what would you want people listening to this episode to take away from this idea of not having it all figured out and that creativity is there for everyone?
I think give yourself a bit of grace, really, in work. And I think it's, around some of the therapy stuff that I've done and my strategies for, dealing not just with my work study and my research is give yourself grace. Acceptance is fine. It doesn't necessarily mean, you like it or you lump it. That's your lot. Commitment to what that acceptance is. And as I said earlier, to know and recognize what you can change and what you can't. The wisdom to know the difference between the two. And as I said, experts know what they know and what they don't know. Maybe just be a bit more of a philosopher, be a bit easier on yourself, take the pressure off yourself. You don't know all the answers yet. And that, yet again, it comes from, as I referred to earlier about the Olympic logo and Citius, Altius, Fortius is something that John Kessel, American volleyball coach, refers to yet. And that's your, you're always working on the to be faster, stronger, higher, and you don't know you don't know all the answers yet. Your feedback as well. I spoke about feedback, and you take your feedback from your past. That might be last year, it might be yesterday, it might be 2 seconds ago. So your feedback comes from your past. It's formed in your present, but it's your plan for your future. And even then, you might not get it right every time, but every day, unfortunately, is a school day. Sporting context, as in life, you win some, you learn some. You win some, you learn some. You're not immune to perceived failure or not quite getting it right on that day, but it doesn't mean that it does not mean that you've failed. Be brave as well. Have courage to make those decisions, because it is all an experiment. And I think whether you're a coach or a teacher, that you provide for a safe space and environment to experiment. You're referring back to something I heard it's like years ago. Work like you don't need the money. Dance like no one's watching. Love like you've never been hurt. And to live life and to never have done those things is maybe not to have been creative or to have lived at all. There's no immunity to feeling like you've not got it quite right. on a certain day. Try and align to what I've described as, and as I define and have practiced and researched around what I perceive creativity to be, being creative to be. That within sporting contexts, as in within life, we see things around us, we perceive things, we have to process things, and we have to be productive on that to make decisions. But unlike King Solomon, try to apply all that good stuff to yourself, talking and sharing with others and yourself. Remember the tape recording method, because remember, it's not so much about how you introduce yourself by what you've done or what you do, but with others, talking with others, being with others and yourself. The difference you make to and with others is also ultimately about the difference that you can make with and for yourself.
Michael, thank you very much for sharing that quite important message and sharing your insights regarding creativity in everyday life as much as in a sporting context. If this conversation resonated with you, please like, share and subscribe. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. Share it with someone who would benefit from listening to it. You can listen to Trauma, Training and Transformation, Exploring How Movement Heals the Mind on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, or wherever you find your podcasts. Equally, you can find the full episodes on my YouTube channel, James Older 003. I've also opened the community section on YouTube where I share messages and advice. Please join me and share your insight on your day and help others. You can join that, subscribe and join the discussion. I'd genuinely like to hear your perspectives and how you can help me and how we can help others benefit from how movement can heal the mind. And do you feel the pressure of believing you should have figured life out yourself? I'll leave you with this quote. As Carl Jung suggested, we're not simply what happened to us, but we are who we choose to become. Because transformation is not about having all the answers, it's about continuing to move forward even when we do not. Until next time, keep training the body, keep strengthening the mind, and keep moving forward and towards transformation.